Ethan had always known the harshness of life. The cold, damp alleyways that had become his home were a far cry from the warm, welcoming homes that others seemed to enjoy. His stomach often growled in hunger, his clothes were ragged, and his spirit, though strong, was slowly wearing thin. Yet, in a way, he had learned to survive on his own. The streets taught him things no school could: how to read people's faces, how to tell the difference between a genuine smile and one that held contempt, and how to pick out the best scraps from the trash. It was in this very alley, the familiar cold breeze biting at his exposed skin, that Ethan found himself again, searching through a discarded bag of food, hoping for something edible. His hands, calloused from years of constant use, moved swiftly, pulling out half-eaten sandwiches and bruised fruit. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't the way he had dreamed of living, but it was survival. The sharp stench of the alley mixed with the faint smell of stale bread, but Ethan didn't mind. It had become part of the environment, something he had learned to accept. Just as he grabbed a sandwich, hoping it wasn't too stale, a loud voice interrupted his thoughts. A vendor, clearly frustrated by the sight of him, stormed toward him. "Get away from there, you little thief!" the vendor shouted, his voice cutting through the quiet morning air. Ethan froze, the sandwich halfway to his mouth. Fear clutched at him, and for a moment, he was paralyzed, not knowing what to do. The vendor's words stung, but Ethan had learned to take the insults in stride. He had heard worse. The vendor was relentless, his face red with anger. "You're driving away my customers, you filthy little beggar," he yelled, the weight of his words bearing down on Ethan like a physical blow. Ethan dropped the sandwich, its contents spilling onto the ground, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. The vendor's words stung deeply. It wasn't just the anger in his voice, but the fact that Ethan had become used to being invisible, ignored by the world. The thought of being seen as nothing but a nuisance made his chest tighten. As the vendor stepped closer, Ethan's first instinct was to run. But then, something unexpected happened. A soft, yet firm voice interrupted the tension in the air. "I'll pay for whatever he's taken," the woman said. Ethan looked up, startled. There, standing at a distance, was a woman, dressed in a casual outfit that didn't match the street's grimy environment. Her presence was commanding, yet gentle. She was taller than most women he had encountered, and there was a softness to her that caught Ethan off guard. The vendor turned to her, his frustration morphing into a strange respect as he recognized who she was. "Miss Douglas, no need to concern yourself with this," he said, his voice suddenly much more respectful, as if her presence had immediately placed him in his place. Ethan didn't understand who she was, but there was something about her that was different, something that made him feel like he wasn't just a street urchin. "This one's always digging through trash, scaring off customers. Been trying to get the sheriff to do something about him for weeks," the vendor continued, clearly trying to justify his harsh words. The woman didn't respond to the vendor's complaints. Instead, she took a few steps closer to Ethan, her gaze softening. "What's your name?" she asked gently, crouching down slightly to meet his eyes. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. It had been so long since anyone had asked him that question, let alone asked with such genuine interest. He glanced at her, then quickly looked away, unsure of what to say. "Are you hungry?" she asked again, her voice still calm, almost soothing. Ethan's stomach growled in response, betraying him. He didn't want to admit how hungry he was, how much he had been surviving on scraps for weeks. But something about this woman made him feel that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to hide his hunger anymore. He nodded slowly, unsure of what to do with the offer. "There's a diner across the street," she said, gesturing in its direction. "Real food, not scraps." The thought of real food, something he hadn't had in what felt like forever, made his stomach churn in anticipation. The woman stood up, her back straight, as if waiting for him to follow. Ethan stood frozen, unsure if he could trust her, but when he looked at her again, he saw no judgment in her eyes, just kindness, something he hadn't seen much of. She started walking toward the diner, and after a few moments of indecision, Ethan found himself following her. It wasn't like the other times when people had offered charity in a way that made him feel small and undeserving. There was something different about this woman, something genuine in the way she spoke, in the way she looked at him, as though he was worthy of more than just a handout. As they entered the diner, the smells of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling food filled the air. Ethan had never been in a place like this before, and for a moment he felt out of place, as though everyone could tell he didn't belong. But the woman who had introduced herself as Lily made sure to pick a booth that gave him a clear view of both the entrance and exit. It was an odd thing to notice, but for some reason, it made Ethan feel safe. When the waitress approached, Lily ordered 2 of everything: pancakes, eggs, bacon, and orange juice. The waitress raised an eyebrow at their unusual pairing, but didn't comment further. The food arrived shortly, and Ethan barely took a moment before reaching for the fork. But then he hesitated, glancing up at Lily for permission. She smiled, a gentle nod encouraging him to eat. "Go ahead," she said. "It's all for you." With that, Ethan dug in. The food was warm, comforting, and filling, nothing like the cold scraps he was used to. As he ate, he felt a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. But Lily didn't press him, didn't ask him about his past. She simply sat there, waiting for him to finish. It was the first time in a long time that he felt cared for, and it felt overwhelming. After he finished, Lily gently asked him his name. "Ethan," he replied, his voice still rough from disuse. The simple conversation felt like a breath of fresh air. It was the beginning of something that Ethan couldn't yet understand, but that Lily seemed to know all too well. Ethan's days with Lily quickly became a blend of structure and uncertainty. He had never known the comfort of a real home, but in her apartment, things were different. The first few nights were the hardest, filled with uneasy sleep and dreams of his former life on the streets. The warmth of the bed, the soft pillows, the feeling of safety. It was all so foreign to him, yet he knew he had to embrace it. He couldn't afford to be weak, not after surviving so much already. Lily's home was nothing like the cold, impersonal places he had passed through in his life. The apartment was modest, but it was always filled with a sense of calm and order. Lily was always busy with work, but she made sure to spend time with him, helping him adjust to his new reality. At first, Ethan had resisted, pushing back against the idea of being rescued. He had always been told to fend for himself, that no one cared enough to help. But Lily's patience, her unwavering belief that he could do more, started to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. Each day felt like a new challenge. Ethan didn't trust easily, and the thought of opening up to anyone, even someone as kind as Lily, seemed impossible. But she didn't give up on him. She didn't force him to talk or share his past, but she made sure he had everything he needed: food, clothes, school supplies, and most importantly, time. Time to heal, time to grow, and time to see that the world wasn't as cold as it once seemed. When Lily enrolled him in school, Ethan was terrified. The idea of sitting in a classroom surrounded by other kids, many of whom came from families who had everything he didn't, was intimidating. He had always been the outcast, the one who didn't belong. But Lily was adamant that education was the key to breaking free from his past. She spent hours with him after school, helping him with his homework, reading over his assignments, and offering encouragement. "You're smarter than you think," she would tell him, her voice always filled with quiet conviction. At first, it was a struggle. Ethan had missed years of formal education, and his academic skills were far behind those of his peers. He couldn't understand why everyone else seemed to grasp things so easily while he sat there, frustrated, unable to catch up. Lily never made him feel ashamed of his struggles. Instead, she encouraged him to keep going, to do his best, and not worry about being perfect. "It's not about being the best," she told him. "It's about not giving up." Little by little, Ethan's confidence began to grow. He spent hours after school poring over books, reading things he never thought he would. He began to excel in subjects that had once felt impossible, and with every success, his belief in himself grew stronger. The boy who had once dug through garbage for his next meal was now the one staying up late, studying, and making strides toward a future that had once seemed out of reach. But it wasn't just his academics that were improving. Ethan started to open up in ways he never had before. He had always kept his feelings locked inside, afraid that sharing them would make him weak. But with Lily's support, he began to trust her. He told her about the pain of losing his parents, about the nights he spent on the streets, and the loneliness that had followed him for years. For the first time, he felt like someone understood him, that someone cared enough to listen without judgment. Lily, too, was undergoing her own transformation. In the months that passed, she began to question the life she had built for herself. The corporate world had once been her everything: success, power, respect. But as she spent more time with Ethan, she realized how hollow that success had felt. She had sacrificed relationships, personal happiness, and even her own well-being in pursuit of a career that, in the end, left her unfulfilled. As Ethan blossomed under her care, Lily found herself rediscovering the joy of simple things, spending time with someone who mattered, building a home instead of a career, and finding meaning in the quiet moments. Her relationship with her father remained strained, as he never truly accepted Ethan into their lives. He couldn't understand why Lily was so determined to help a street child when she had a world of opportunities before her. But Lily's resolve never wavered. She had made her choice, and nothing could change that. Ethan had become her family, her purpose, and her greatest achievement. In those early months, Ethan and Lily built a bond stronger than any biological connection could ever be. It wasn't just about the things they did for each other, but about the shared understanding that, despite their vastly different worlds, they were both searching for something that had been missing. For Ethan, it was a sense of belonging, a place where he wasn't invisible. For Lily, it was the discovery that love wasn't something you could measure with money or success. It was something you felt, something you gave freely and without expectation. The day Ethan walked into the school principal's office to sign up for a science competition, he felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. It was his first real attempt at something outside of his comfort zone, something that wasn't just about survival, but about achievement. When he walked out with the registration form in hand, he felt like he was finally part of something. It was a small victory, but it was the first of many that would shape his future. Lily watched Ethan from the sidelines, pride swelling in her chest. He was no longer the scared, withdrawn child she had met months ago. He was growing into a confident young man, capable of doing things he had never believed possible. And with every step forward, she was reminded of just how powerful the human spirit could be when given the chance to thrive. Ethan had come a long way since those first hesitant days with Lily. What had started as a simple act of kindness had turned into something much more profound. He was no longer the boy who rummaged through garbage for his next meal or lived in constant fear of rejection. Under Lily's care, he had transformed, slowly at first, but with increasing momentum. But even as he began to flourish, the world around him still presented challenges he couldn't always prepare for. At school, Ethan's newfound confidence collided with the harsh realities of being different. Though he had made incredible academic progress, there was always a group of students who couldn't accept him. It wasn't just his background that set him apart. It was his quiet intensity, his unwillingness to conform to their expectations. The other kids noticed, and their whispers grew louder. Some called him a teacher's pet because he excelled in subjects they struggled with. Others whispered that he was only good at school because Lily was pushing him too hard. Despite his success, Ethan found himself isolated in ways that made him question if he truly belonged anywhere. He was not like the other children. He didn't fit into the mold of those who came from stable homes, who had family vacations and Saturday soccer games. One day, a boy named Max, who had often been critical of Ethan's quiet nature, decided to confront him. "What's it like?" Max sneered. "To be the charity case. To be the one everyone feels sorry for." The word stung, sharper than Ethan had expected. He had worked so hard to shed the identity of the homeless boy, yet here it was again, thrown in his face. For a moment, Ethan felt the familiar weight of shame creeping back, but something inside him refused to let it consume him. He was no longer that boy. He had fought too hard, come too far. "I'm not a charity case," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just a person, trying to do what I can." Max laughed, clearly unconvinced, but Ethan didn't care anymore. He had learned something important that day, that the world would always try to label him, try to reduce him to something small, something less than human. But Ethan had learned to define himself. He didn't need anyone else's approval. Still, the bullying didn't stop. At lunch, kids would make snide remarks, and during group projects, he would often find himself left out. But he refused to let their words control him. Lily had taught him not to hide from challenges, but to face them head-on. So he kept his head down and his focus sharp. He worked harder than anyone else, pushing through the barriers that were placed in his path. He even found solace in the things he loved: coding, robotics, and learning about artificial intelligence. These were the things that excited him, the things that made him feel alive. When he was absorbed in a project, the noise of the world faded away. His passion for technology became a shield, protecting him from the harshness of his reality. It wasn't just at school that Ethan struggled. At home, Lily faced her own battles. Her health had been deteriorating ever since her surgery, and while she tried her best to hide it from Ethan, the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. She was constantly tired, her once vibrant energy drained by the medications and the rigorous schedule she kept. She had stopped attending some of her consulting sessions, telling Ethan it was because she was too busy. But Ethan could tell something was wrong. He began to notice the small changes, the way she held herself when she stood, the way she looked a little paler each day, how she seemed to tire more easily. It wasn't just the long hours at work anymore. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite understand. One evening, after Ethan had finished a particularly difficult assignment for school, he noticed Lily sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the bills. Her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled through the papers, and for a moment, Ethan saw the woman who had been his rock, the woman who had never shown weakness, crumble before him. Without thinking, he walked up behind her and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Lily, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, yet filled with concern. She looked up, startled, but managed to smile. "I'm fine, Ethan. Just a little tired." He wasn't convinced. Lily had always been so strong, so independent, but now it seemed like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Ethan, for the first time, felt the burden of responsibility for someone else. He couldn't bear to see her struggle, and yet he wasn't sure how to help. The next day, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. He had always been the one to stay in the background, to observe from a distance, but he knew that if things didn't change, Lily might burn out. So he took a deep breath and did something he had never done before. He called one of Lily's old friends, someone he had heard her talk about on a few occasions. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew that Lily needed help, and he wasn't about to wait for her to admit it. The conversation was awkward at first, but Ethan eventually explained how Lily had been struggling. Her friend, Diane, listened intently and promised to reach out to Lily. Ethan didn't know if it would make a difference, but just the act of reaching out felt like the first step toward change. For the first time in his life, he realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of strength. Lily, though proud, had never expected Ethan to take on the responsibility of helping her, but she saw it in his eyes. The same strength that had once saved him from a life of uncertainty was now being used to support her. It made her realize how far they had come together. No longer was she the only one holding things together. Ethan had grown into a young man capable of facing the world's challenges, and in his quiet way, he was teaching her how to accept help when it was needed. Their bond had become something stronger than either of them could have imagined. They had faced down the harshness of the world, but now, as Ethan continued to grow, Lily saw the incredible strength in him that she had always known was there, but never fully understood until now. Ethan's transformation from a frightened, street-smart boy into a young man with purpose and drive was nothing short of extraordinary, but it was about to be tested in ways neither he nor Lily could have predicted. They had built a life together, brick by brick, each moment layered with sacrifice and growth. Yet the future, as they had learned time and again, was never guaranteed. Lily had always been strong, but over time, the toll of her illness became undeniable. Her condition had worsened, despite her attempts to shield Ethan from the growing reality of her situation. Her once vibrant spirit was now drained, replaced by a quiet weariness that seemed to seep into every corner of their home. The endless appointments, the trips to the hospital, and the growing concern on the faces of doctors had become part of their routine. But the truth was harder to ignore each passing day. The once unstoppable Lily was now a woman on the edge, fighting a battle she had never anticipated. Ethan had noticed the changes long before Lily had admitted the extent of her illness. He had seen the way she faltered sometimes when standing up, how her hands trembled slightly as she poured his cereal or handed him his backpack in the mornings. It was always subtle at first, but as time wore on, it became impossible to ignore. The worry began to gnaw at Ethan. He was no longer the boy who had to fend for himself in the streets. He had learned to care for Lily, to be the protector, the one who made sure she was okay. But now he found himself in a position where he couldn't fix everything. The one person who had always believed in him, who had seen his potential when no one else had, was now the one who needed saving. It was during one of Lily's routine checkups that the truth came crashing down. The doctor had called them in, a somber expression on his face, and delivered the news. Lily's liver was failing, and there was no time to waste. A transplant was her only hope, but the waiting list was long, and her condition was deteriorating quickly. Ethan's heart sank at the words, the weight of them pressing down on him with the force of 1,000 fears. He had always known that the world was unfair, but this was beyond his comprehension. Lily, the woman who had given him everything, the woman who had pulled him out of the gutter when no one else cared, was now at the mercy of a broken system. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt utterly powerless. He had faced so many challenges, fought through so much pain and suffering. But this was different. He wasn't prepared for this kind of battle. Lily had always been the one who kept him going, who kept pushing him when he wanted to give up. But now, she was the one in need. Ethan couldn't sit idly by and watch her slip away. It was then that a thought, terrifying and powerful, crossed his mind. Without hesitation, he made up his mind. He would donate part of his liver to save Lily. It wasn't just a chance to repay her for everything she had done for him. It was his only choice. The connection they shared wasn't based on blood or genetics. It was built on the foundation of love, sacrifice, and shared experiences. Ethan wasn't just doing this for Lily. He was doing it for himself, for the woman who had given him the strength to become someone better than he ever thought possible. When he shared his decision with Lily, her reaction was a mixture of disbelief and fear. She tried to talk him out of it, warning him of the risks, the complications, and the long recovery. But Ethan, with the same determination that had carried him through every challenge in his life, refused to back down. "I have to do this, Lily," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You've given me everything. The least I can do is give part of myself to save you. This is what family does." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she knew there was no stopping him. She had always known that Ethan was a fighter, but now she saw something even more profound. A young man who was willing to give up everything for someone he loved. It was a reflection of the love she had shown him all those years ago, the love that had given him a future, This was the ultimate sacrifice, and it was one that Ethan made without a second thought. The surgery was scheduled, and the day arrived faster than they could have imagined. The hospital rooms felt sterile and cold, the beeping monitors and the flashing lights a stark contrast to the warmth of their home. But Ethan didn't flinch. He had never been afraid of the pain. He had lived through too much already. What terrified him was the thought of losing Lily, of the woman who had become his everything, slipping through his fingers because of something he couldn't control. As the surgery began, both Lily and Ethan were in separate rooms, their lives in the hands of skilled surgeons and a delicate balance of fate. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity as their families, friends, and doctors waited anxiously outside, their hearts heavy with worry. Robert, Lily's estranged father, had arrived just in time, his presence an unexpected twist to the story. He had come to support his daughter, to reconcile the years of distance between them. His regret for the way he had treated Lily was palpable, but the time for words had passed. Now, they could only wait. When the surgery was over, and both Lily and Ethan were recovering in their respective rooms, the weight of what they had both endured began to sink in. Lily awoke first, her body sore and weak, but her heart full of gratitude. She was alive, thanks to Ethan's selfless decision. It was more than just a second chance. It was a rebirth. The years that had passed, the struggles and the pain, had all led to this moment, this incredible act of love and sacrifice that would forever bind their fates together. Ethan, still groggy from the anesthesia, smiled weakly when Lily came to his side. Their journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had both been through more than most people could imagine, but their bond had only grown stronger through it all. In the end, it wasn't just the liver transplant that had saved them. It was their shared strength, their love for one another, and their unwavering belief in the power of family. A family that wasn't defined by blood, but by choice, sacrifice, and the courage to face the world together. In the months that followed, as they both recovered and slowly returned to their lives, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but now they had each other, and that was enough.